The chess endgame is one of the most important parts of any chess game. In this video today we're going to be looking at some of the most basic chess endings that all chess players need to know and how to avoid some of the most common mistakes in the endgame. Just before I start this video though, I do want to mention that at the end of this video on the timestamp you will see that there is a little quiz to test your endings at the end, and this will allow you some time to make sure that you've understood everything that is going to be covered in this particular video. If you think that you're a strong player and want to skip to the end just to make sure that you understand these particular endings, you can do, but for those who are just beginning, I would recommend first watching this video and then understanding the content before attempting this particular quiz. So here is the first checkmating position that I want you to have a look at. This is what we like to call an overkill mate, because in this position white has now got two white queens. If you're wondering how he might have got the white queens, well, maybe at some point he might have promoted one of his extra pawns to a queen. So in this position white only needs two queens to be able to deliver a very easy and efficient checkmate. So this is the final position that I want you to have a look at. Notice here that this white queen is guarding the 7th rank, and because of this, this black king cannot come off the back rank. That's what we want to do in most of these endgames, is trap this black king on the back rank, because from there we will be able to deliver the checkmate. In this position though, we still need to be a bit careful not to make any small mistakes. In this position, if we now move this queen that was guarding the 7th rank to a move like g8, okay, it does give a check, but this does allow the king to come off this back rank. Remember, we want to try and trap the black king onto this back rank. So instead, we want to keep this this queen on the 7th rank, and now we can deliver checkmate via the move queen to h8. Notice that this queen is guarding all of these squares, and this queen is now checkmating the black king on the back rank. So let's see how we reach this final position by imagining now that both of our quick queens are on our first rank. How do we get to that final position? Well, we can do this via a method that we like to call the staircase mate. Here I've got two white queens, and what I want to do is just limit the amount of squares that this black king can go to. And I can do this via many different ways, but I'm going to first play the move queen to a2, and what I'm going to try and do is move my queen over to g2, and then I'm going to deliver what is known as a staircase mate. It's called the staircase mate because it's a pattern of queens moving up very slowly, a bit like almost like you walking up a staircase. So now let's say the king moves to d3. Now you can move your queen over to g2. And there's nothing that black can do here. We're just going to slowly move our rooks, our queens up. And each time we are limiting the amount of root space that the king can then go to. And there's nothing that the black king can do about this, because in this position, it can't go near either of the queens because both queens are defending each other. So he wouldn't be able to capture either one of them. So let's just see how white is able to deliver the checkmate. Let's see now the king goes to e3. We now throw a check. Notice we're guarding the 2nd rank. Let's say this king moves up to f4. Well, we throw another check. This king has to go back. It can't capture the queen because we're defending with our other queen. So let's say king to e5. Another check. Again, notice we're just limiting the amount of squares that this king can go to. This king moves back further. Another check. Once again, the king will have to move. And now we've reached that very familiar final position where we had the two queens, one on the 7th rank and one on the 6th rank, guarding all the squares. This king can't now go off this back rank now, and we can deliver a nice and quick checkmate with the move queen to g8. Notice now that these two queens are attacking this king. This queen is guarding all of these squares, but the other queen is now attacking it along the back rank. So that's a simple way of delivering the checkmate via a staircase mate. So just to show you that from the beginning, if I go back just a sec here, Move these back. So first, get your queens onto a staircase position, and then via this you're now going to move up in a staircase formation like so. Let's just move the king here, for example, and it doesn't matter what black will do in this position, as we are going to be able to checkmate him on the back rank with our 2 queens. Here is the second position that I want you to have a look at. This is also an overkill mate, because in this position white is up a clear queen and also a rook. Notice here as well that the black king is on the back rank. Once again, this is quite an easy checkmate. See if you can try and find it. What is a checkmate in this position? Well done, it is the move rook to g8, and this is checkmate on the back rank. Once again, we are going to practice how we get to that position. And once again, we can use what we like to call the staircase mate. So see if you can find the first move. There's lots of different moves that work in this position, but if you manage to find the move, rook to a2, well done. So this is going to be the start of my checkmating solution. So here, the black king might move over to d4, and we now move our rook over to g2. Can you remember the plan that white needs to play in this position? Absolutely right. You want to be able to do a staircase mate all the way up the board. So let's see that in action. So this king might move here. We throw in a check. And it doesn't matter if the king comes close to any of our pieces, because the queen here is now guarding this rook, and it's quite easy to then be able to deliver a staircase mate. So rook to g4, slowly moving up the board, and this will now be a checkmate. Once again, we've reached this position, the king is on the back rank, and we can now deliver checkmate via g8. Here is the third position. In this position we also have an overkill mate. In this position white is up 2 clear rooks, and this makes it a very easy winning position. So it's white to move in this position. Once again, you'll notice that this rook guards this 7th rank. So because of this, can you find the checkmate in 1 in this position? Well done. It is the move rook to g8, checkmate. Notice once again, the rook guarding these squares, the king cannot come off the back rank, and then we're able to deliver a checkmate on the back rank. So once again, we need to try and get to our final position. In this position, it's white to move. Can you find the first move that I would suggest playing? Well, in this position, you can still play the move rook to a2. However, there's going to be a small problem. Now, the black king can potentially move to f3, and what this does is it now prevents this rook from getting to that g2 square. So we need to be a little bit careful here. In this position though, we can keep moving the king back. Notice that I've limited the amount of squares it can go to. I'm slowly pushing it onto the back rank, and here I can play the move rook to h3, now pushing this king backwards. It can't go forwards because of our rook here. Okay, so now this king can come to g4, but we've got a small issue. The issue is this king is now hitting this rook. But this is where we need to use a bit of our endgame knowledge, and this is why we're going to be using what we like to call a distance check. The reason why it's a distance check is because this king is a very slow moving piece. It can only go 1 square at a time around the board. Meanwhile, this rook can get to the other side of the board very easily. So one of the things that is really good to do, and this is in kind of general in most endings, is you want to get your rook, as far away from the king as possible. So in this position now we can play the move rook to b3. And notice we've now almost got our staircase here. Okay, the black king could try to run up the board, or let's make it a bit harder. Let's say he goes to f4. We throw another check. The king is going to have to move backwards. We throw another check, b5. King moves up. We throw another check. And now here in this position, once again, the black king is going to get to this square and is guarding now the b7 square. It doesn't matter though, as once again we can use our knowledge of the distance check. We move our rook all the way over to the other side of the board. And wherever this king goes, let's say it goes to d7, we now move our other rook to the other side. King comes here, We throw another check, and once again we do still need to be careful. The king is on f8, so we can't just play checkmate here because he'll capture the rook. So we just move our rook all the way to the other side. King comes over, move our other rook to b6, and now this king is going to be checkmated. It doesn't matter what he does. Once again, we've got our rook on the 7th rank. This black king is trapped on the side of the board, so we can deliver checkmate very easily. Can you find the checkmate? That's absolutely right. Rook to b8. Oh, so I've got to make a king move first. Then rook to b8. Checkmate. Here's the next checkmating position that I want you to have a look at. This is known as the queen and king versus the lone king. So in this position, you can do checkmate in many different ways. See if you can find a way to checkmate the black king. Did you manage to find all the different ways that you can checkmate the black king in this position? Well, here, one of the simplest ways is to do queen to g7 checkmate. This is known as the kiss of death checkmate because this queen is being defended by his own king. So this king cannot capture this queen because that would be an illegal move. But you can also deliver checkmate via a back row mate as well. Notice here that in this position, our white king is opposing this black king. We actually call this another endgame thing for you called opposition. And here we can deliver checkmate via either d8, this is checkmate. Notice here the black king is under attack, or we can deliver it via e8. So let's see how we reach that final position. Well, what we first need to do is we create what we like to call a box around the black king. And we can do this using our queen. This queen can bully the black king into a corner almost single-handedly. So in this position, a nice move to start with, and I say there are many different solutions to this, but a move to start with is the move queen to d3. Notice here that now we've created a box around the black king. So this king can only access these squares within these boxes, assuming it is not going to be checked by the white queen. So we now limited the amount of squares now that the black king can go to. Well, in this position, this king could now go to maybe f4. But here we might want to tighten the box, but it might be a little bit tricky, as if we try and move a queen here, well, we would end up drawing the game quite easily. So instead we need to enlist the help of our white king. We cannot checkmate the black king with just a queen alone. We need to use our white king to help. In this position now we can move our king to f2. Now this king is going to have to move backwards, and in this position we can move our king once again to f3, and now it can no longer access this square. Now let's say the king moves to a square like f5 here. Oh no, sorry, the queen's checking it, so let's go to f6, sorry. And here in this position we can now tighten the box further. In this position now we can play the move queen to d5. Now notice that our box is getting smaller. So now the king can go to e7. Now we can move our king to help our white king. So we're slowly moving our pieces up the board, and eventually we're going to checkmate this black king onto the back rank. Okay, well, the king could come here, but now this is an opportunity to tighten the box even further. Queen to e5. Notice here that this box is getting smaller. This black king cannot take the queen because we're now defended by this king. So the king goes back. King to f5. And now the amount of squares that this black king can go to is very small now. It can only go to these two squares. So let's say now this king now moves back to g8. And we can now, if we want to, move our queen up the board, which will limit the amount of squares it can go to. Notice here now that this black king has only got 2 legal squares it can go to. So let's say the king moves to h8. We can now move our king forward up to g6. And it doesn't matter where this king can go to. if it goes back to g8, we can deliver checkmate in 3 different ways. We can do it on the back rank or via a kiss of death checkmate on g7. Now just a little bit of word of warning for you in this particular ending. Here is a position that could typically come up. Notice that this white queen has done a very good job in limiting the amount of squares that the black king can go to. However, you still need to be very careful in this position. If you play the move king to g6, which looks pretty good because we are getting ready to put our queen onto g7, unfortunately this is now a stalemate. Now a stalemate occurs when, if let's say it is your move, but you have no legal moves that you can play, that also includes, let's say, moving a piece or a pawn, then that would be a stalemate. So in this position here, although we've got very close to checkmating the black king, this king has got no legal squares it can go to because it's all been guarded by white's pieces. So as a result, this would be a draw. So instead, what we need to do in this position is we need to be a little bit careful how we move this queen. And what we can do now is move the queen to e7. This still gives black 2 remaining squares that it can go to. And after king to h8, we can now move our king forward to g6. And well, the king will be forced to g8. And once again, we've got 3 different ways that we can checkmate the black king. So just be careful of those stalemates. They can happen very commonly in beginner level play. The final checkmate that I wanted to have a look at today is how to win with just a lone king and a lone rook versus the lone king. And this is actually, interestingly enough, a commonly misplayed ending, even up to intermediate play. And to be honest with you, it's quite an easy ending, and it should be quite easy for you to be able to win this. But there are lots of ways that this particular position can go wrong. Well, here's our final position. You'll notice here, once again, I have the white king that is opposing this black king. So it's guarding these 3 squares. And then I can deliver checkmate on the next move via the back rank. As I say, you might notice this pattern, it's come up loads of times, but we need to get this king onto the back rank in order to win. So in this position, can you find the checkmate in 1? Absolutely, it is the move rook to h7. And you notice here that this is checkmate because the rook is attacking on the back rank and the king is guarding those squares. So to reach this particular position and win this particular ending, we do need to take our time in this position. Now the good news is the rules of the ending are that there is something known as the 50 move rule. So what this basically means is that after 50 moves, if there's been no pawn movements, a capture, or any kind of progress being made on the board, after 50 moves, that would then be considered a draw. Thankfully, however, we have a lot of moves to be able to deliver this checkmate, and it should be more than enough moves to win this position. So here, our first step is we want to get our white king to oppose this other black king and directly oppose it on these 3 squares. So the way we can do that, we can play the move rook to e2. Now notice we directly oppose this black king. Now, the good news is for black, he can get away from this direct opposition, and he can do this many ways. He can play the move king to d4, and now notice that these 2 kings are not directly opposing each other now. However, this does not matter, as now we can limit the amount of squares that this black king can go to, and we can do this with our rook. We can now play rook to h3. Notice now we are guarding all the squares it can go to, and once again our plan remains the same. We're going to try and push this black king all the way to the back rank. Well, here in this position, it would be a mistake for black to play the move king to e4 because this will help us massively in delivering the checkmate. Now notice we're now directly opposite, so we can now make progress with our rook. We can move it up to h4, and now notice now that this king has no option but to go backwards in this position. So let's say it goes to e5 now, and you'll see here that now we have made a little bit of progress because we're slowly pushing this king back to the back rank. And again, in this position, we can directly oppose the black king once again. Going back though, let's just say now that the king goes over to f5 instead. Here what we can do is we can play king to f3. Again, we are directly opposing. And in this position, if let's say the king comes to g5, we once again need to use our knowledge that we learned from the 2 rooks versus the king of distance checking. So we need to put our rook as far away from the black king as possible. And we can do this via the move. Can you find it? That's absolutely right. Rook to a4. And notice here we're still guarding all of these squares, but we've put our rook as far away from the black king as possible. Now, at this position, this is very important. Here, if this king goes back to f5, we once again can make progress via rook to a5. And again, this black king will have to move backwards to some square. So instead, let's say now the black king comes to h5. Well, in this position, we can force opposition via the move king to g3. And it doesn't matter where this black king goes to, it's going to end up on the g5 square. So now he comes to g5, and look at that, we've reached our ideal position. We have direct opposition, so now we can push the king back via the move rook to a5 check. Okay, well this king's going to come up to f6, and now we can play the move f4. Now this is where black can be very tricky now in this position. So let's just say he comes to e6, and we would like to come to e4 to get direct opposition, but there's a problem with this. If we come king to e4, then the black king can just go back to f6. And if we come back to f4, then the black king just moves back over, and we're just essentially just doing a square dance. So instead of this, what we need to do is we need to play what we like to call a waiting move. And we can do this not by moving the king around, but instead making a waiting move with the white rook. So in this position now, I'm going to move my rook all the way over to h5. And notice here that if this king comes back to f6, we've got opposition again, we can make progress with our rook. So instead of this, the king might go to d6, and now we can follow the black king with our king. And again, if the rook comes here, we're making progress, we're pushing it back. So the king can keep going over, we go over here, and it doesn't matter where the king goes to, eventually it's going to either have to move backwards, in which case we'd make progress, or it has to come to b6, which then puts it in direct opposition. Now we've made progress. This rook can now come up to h6 with check, and this king will have to move backwards. Okay, so now let's see how we can deliver the mate. I'm going to put the king onto c5 here in this position, because I've now got direct opposition, but now this king could go here. And again, I don't want to go to king to d5 because we're just going to keep doing this little square dance here. So what we instead have to do is do a waiting move, and we can do this once again by shifting our rook all the way over to a5. We can also play rook to g6, but eventually it's going to get under attack. So instead, I'm going to shift it all the way to a6. Now the king will have to go this way. Once again, if it goes here, we've made progress and we've pushed the king to the back rank. So once again, we're slowly making progress. As I say, there's no rush in this position. You've got plenty of moves to be able to deliver the checkmate. As I say, you've got 50 moves to be able to deliver the checkmate. And now you can play the move rook to a7. Notice here, opposition, we kick it back to the back rank, and from here we can now deliver our checkmate fairly quickly. I'm going to play the move king to g6 instead, because if it comes here we can deliver checkmate. So now the king will have to run, and eventually it might get to this point where it's hitting your rook, but it doesn't matter because we need to use our knowledge of, what is it called again? That's right, distance checking. to move over here. Well, the black king could move here. And again, we don't want to go to c6 because we'll just end up doing this little square dance. So instead, waiting move. And now the king will have to go over here. And once it goes to b8, this is checkmate with our rook on g8. So a little bit slower, this particular checkmate. And what I would suggest you do is practice this against a computer. So on chess.com, you can use the practice against the computer program and practice these particular endings. So just to show you this position right from the beginning, once again, we need to move our king up, create that opposition. Once the king moves, we can now limit the squares that the king can go to. And once we get our opposition, we can now do a check, and we're making progress. We're moving the king slowly back to the back rank. Okay, move the rook over. And once we get that opposition again, we can limit the squares by moving our rook up. Again, we've made progress. And in this position, we do need to be careful not to do the square dance, but once we've done our waiting move and the king is now moved on in opposition to the black king, we can now push the black king further. Here we've got our waiting move that you might have noticed there. And once we reach this position, move the rook to the back rank. And again, once the rook goes over, swing your rook over. And in this position, waiting move will be fine here, as now the king will end up being in opposition with the white king. And checkmate can be delivered via rook to g8. The final bit of this video today is going to be a little quiz just to make sure that you've understood everything that you have learnt in this particular video. If you have managed to skip your way through a lot of these because you've understood the checkmates quite easily, this could just be a little test for you to see if you understood some of the basic checkmating positions. Okay, so here we have the first position. We have our overkill mates with our two queens. So what is the move that you can play here as white to deliver a checkmate in 3 using our staircase method? Okay, so have you managed to find it? Well, the first move here to play is the move queen to g6. And now notice that we are going to move our queens up the board. If the king comes to d8, what do you now need to play? Absolutely right, queen to h8. And if this king moves over to c8, we can win with our queen coming to g8. So remember that staircase. Well done if you managed to get the first one. Here's the second position. Now there are many ways that you can win this particular position, but what I want you to try and do is get to our staircase position. So how can I do that with the rook and the queen? Excellent, you found the move. Rook to a2. And now after the king moves, you can now move your rook over to a2. And once again, we can do our staircase along here. And hopefully you manage to find these moves. As I say, practice this at home if you're not too sure on how to do these, and we can checkmate on the back rank. Okay, here is the third position. So this is something that we need to be careful of. So this is white to move. Have you found the move that you need to play? Absolutely. You want to play the move queen to e7, limiting the squares that black king can go to 2. If you go back just to one moment, the move you don't want to play in this position is king to g6, as this will be a stalemate, as the black king has got nowhere it can go to. And here is the final position. So it is white to move. What is the best move to play in this position to get the most efficient checkmate? Okay, so the mistake that maybe some of you might have gone for is the move king to d6. Although it does get opposition, the problem is black can just simply move his king out of opposition, and we're not really making much progress here. Black can repeat the position and actually claim for a draw, so just be careful here. So instead, white needs to play something different here. He needs to make a waiting move, and he can do this with his rook, and he can move it all the way to h7 if he wants to. Now, if the king comes back here, we deliver checkmate on h8 because we've then got opposition. So the king might try and avoid it, but it doesn't matter, as soon as he gets in opposition to the white king, like so, we can deliver checkmate via h8. So there we are. Well done if you got all of the questions right. If you did, then make sure you let me know in the comments below. Well done for making it to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed some of these endings, and I hope you've learnt a little bit of some of the basic checkmating positions that you get in the endgame. If you like what you see, make sure you leave a like. Subscribe to the channel for some future endgame videos that I should put up on the channel soon. But as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.